जस्ट कुछ गुडीज नहीं है, कुछ प्राइजेस नहीं है, दिस इज जस्ट फॉर फन. ऑल द बेस्ट ईच वन ऑफ यू. मैं भी पार्टिसिपेट करूंगा, मुझे भी देखना है मुझे कितना आता है. काउट क्विज स्लाइडो पे है, काउट पे नहीं है. ओके आकाश, प्लीज शेयर योर स्क्रीन. Link is in the chat box by Ash. अरे क्वेश्चन दिख रहा है, प्रेजेंट प्रेजेंट कर दे भाई. प्रेजेंट करने के बाद स्टार्ट करना. किसी ने स्क्रीनशॉट ले लिया क्या?
हाँ ले लिया.
बिल्कुल ले लिया.
ऐसे बच्चे होने चाहिए. गुड.
ऐसे टेस्ट का भी क्या ही फायदा.
इट इज जस्ट फॉर फन यार, कि क्या कितना आता है अपनी औकात चेक करने के लिए, बाकी कुछ नहीं है उससे. वापस तुम लोगों के साथ खेलते हैं केबीसी का दूसरा राउंड. सो सबके पास वो आ गया होगा. लिंक पे पहुंच गया. आकाश, कैन यू चेक हाउ मेनी स्टूडेंट्स हैव एनरोल्ड टिल नाउ? ओके आई एम जस्ट शेयरिंग
35.
35. यार मैंने एनरोल कर लिया, मुझे क्यों नहीं दिख रहा है? अच्छा 36 यूजर्स हैव ज्वाइन. कूल यार. 71 में से 36, 50%. सब 51%. बाकी लोग
40 हो गए.
Okay, I have to speak in English since there are few international students. So we are hosting a quiz on Slido, which will be just only for fun purpose. We are assessing basic HTML knowledge of yours. This is not going to affect your participation in this entire program. So without wasting much of time, as we are on 9:36, let's get started. स्टार्ट करते हैं. यार मुझे दिख क्यों नहीं रहा क्वेश्चन? What is the full form? Hypertext मान. आंसर नहीं बताना है किसी को. अच्छा. Oh my God, Piyush is at on the top. कौन है भाई Piyush? Congratulations. Okay, moving on to the next question. इस बार मुझे जीतना है. अच्छा, this is the correct result. Thank you. एंट्री भी देनी पड़ रही है मुझे, चीटिंग है ये. But there is not. अच्छा, अगर तुम लोगों के कम मार्क्स आते हैं तो योर टीचर विल बी रिस्पॉन्सिबल.
अच्छा.
Please send again the test link. Just for one purpose, and since the quiz has already started, I will not say you to join it. Just stay here. Okay, closing this. वाह पीयूष भैया, टॉप पे हैं आप. Congratulations. एक काम करते हैं, इन टॉप 5 लोगों को फीचर कर देते हैं. चलो आगे देखते हैं. ओके. अच्छा हाँ यार, कल ये बताओ कि आयुष ने कैसा पढ़ा दिया था कि ये 6% लोगों ने बॉडी टैग क्लोज नहीं होता ऐसा लिख दिया है. Okay, Moving on to the next question. Which tag is used to make hyperlink? मुझे जल्दी इसमें यार स्पेलिंग का दिस इज चीटिंग. मुझे कोई बता दो कौन सा आंसर सही है, ए या बी. चलो जान गया. All right, so I would request Joy, please start recording this session and take few screenshots so that we can post it on our social media platforms. Last question, and then we will start with the today's session. This is just a warm up. हाँ भैया, ये हाइपरलिंक नाम का कौन सा टैग होता है? पढ़ो यार, इतना अच्छे से पढ़ा रहा है आयुष. आयुष is teaching very much well. Please give some time. यार ऐसे नहीं करते हैं आकाश, मुझे भी नहीं आ रहा है ये तो. Thank you guys for helping me. Okay, let's go to the final result and अच्छा चला ही गया. पीयूष कहाँ पहुंच गया? ढूंढ पीयूष को. आकाश पीयूष को ढूंढ. कहाँ पहुंच गया पीयूष? क्या गलत कर दिया?
जल्दबाजी में गलत हो गया लास्ट.
Okay, coming to the final results and then we will be starting with this session. I know आयुष मुझे गाली दे रहा होगा, 1 घंटे के सेशन को मैंने 50 मिनट का कर दिया है क्योंकि. Okay, results पे क्लिक. results ऊपर टॉप पे. अच्छा, करेक्ट आंसर कौन सा है यार? अच्छा, तो सॉल्यूशन ये है. B is the solution. All right, folks. So let's get started with the session. Thank you so much, Akash, for this wonderful warm up. And over to you, Aayush.
Thank you, Arshit. So, for the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes, what we'll do is we'll revise yesterday's session, right? So, थोड़ा revise कर देते हैं. So, I hope I'll share my screen first.
Akash, please start the recording of this session. And sorry, folks, we were not able to provide you the recording of yesterday's session due to some technical issues. This will be available on website by Monday. Yeah.
So yesterday we basically started off our discussion in which we basically talked about how websites worked, right? We talked about why we needed HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So let me just. So I talked about, I gave you an example of the shopkeeper and yourself, right? So when you go to the shop, आपको कुछ purchase करना होता है, right? So you have an interaction with the shopkeeper. So in that case, you're the client, right? Because what the client's job is basically to get something, right? He wants to get some resources. So similarly, when you are talking about the internet, your device is like a client. Why? Because whenever you want to visit any website, you wish to basically get some resources to access that particular website. Like when you wish to go to google.com, you need some resources to access that particular, you need to resources to access google.com, right? And I said that this information gets sent to the ISP, internet service provider, right? These are the people that you pay, right, to access the internet. And I said that the ISP sends information to the DNS, the domain name system. I said it was like a telephone book, right? Like basically the website name is mapped to its IP address, right? The IP address, just think of it as an address. जैसे हमारा address होता है ना, like just think of it as that. Everybody has a unique address. So similarly, every website has an address, right? So the purpose of this address is we want to basically locate where google.com is, right? Because once we locate where Google is, we are able to get the resources. Remember, I said that we are basically the client, right? And there is another thing called a server, right? In the web world, you will often hear this term client server relationship, right? So the client is basically your device, right? Requesting some resource. The server will send back those resources the client requested, right? And those resources are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? And we talked about HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We talked about what HTML is, and I gave you like an example, like जब आप कोई house build कर रहे होते हो, right? When you're building some house, you know that HTML basically like acts like a the underlying structure of that house, meaning it's like the walls, the roof. That's kind of the HTML. Like when you go to any website, the buttons, content, all of that is basically defined in the HTML. Right, CSS is like decorating, like when you're painting your house, you're styling your house, right? That's CSS. JavaScript is what? Functionality, right? Like when you want to implement electricity into your house, when you want to implement running water, that's JavaScript, right? So we basically discussed, this was an introductory PPT in which we basically discussed the importance of these three files, right? So I hope nobody has any doubt in these part, because this is a very easy part, right? Does anybody have a question? HTML is structure making, CSS is design, JavaScript is event managing. Yeah, you can say that. Like HTML is basically structure, CSS is used for styling, JavaScript is for functionality. That's it. So now yesterday I talked about, I basically introduced some, HTML code, right? So I basically talked about, I went to source code and I defined a file called index.html, and I talked about why it should be named index. Remember, I told you that whenever you want to implement a HTML file for your home page, you need to name it index, right? Because whenever your browser basically opens up any website, it looks for that particular file called index.html, right? So that's important to understand. Any other file besides the home page can be named anything else, right? But the home page should be named index.html, right? And yesterday I also introduced like some code in which I basically talked about. Remember, I said that within the HTML code, right? Within the HTML code, it consists of two things: the head tag and the body tag, right? The head tag basically consists of what? Metadata, right? Metadata is what? Data about data, right? It's basically the data, like you saw the title of our web page, right? It consists of the characters that it can support, right? It also is able to do something else that I will talk about in the upcoming, in a few minutes. But you just need to know head is what? Metadata. It basically consists of metadata. And body what? Within this consists of all your main HTML code, right? Tags. Remember I said HTML consists of two things: tags, attributes. These were the tags, right? These were the tags: opening and closing tag, self-closing tag, right? What were the self-closing tags? I'll show you. This was a self-closing tag, right? Because in this there is no explicit, you don't have to explicitly define that a closing tag, right? You don't have to do this. You don't have to do this, right? You don't have to do this. You can simply do, you can see that all you have to do is slash angular braces, right? So we looked at these two types of tags. Similarly, we also looked at the headings, right? We looked at headings, H1, H2, H3. So let me just open it. We looked at headings. We also looked at paragraphs. So you can see the different types of headings we looked at, right? I said that as you go down, as you go from H1 to H6, the rank of importance decreases, meaning H1 is more important than H2, H2 is more important than H3, and so forth, right? Then we looked at paragraphs, right? Sorry. Then we looked at paragraphs, right? I said something like, we know whenever you don't have any content, right? I said you can basically fill in, right? Replace it with your own text, right? So I basically showed you this neat trick, right? Lorem, and then the number of characters you want, right? So let me show you a better view of it. Lorem 20, right? So if you want characters of, I don't know, like 100 characters, right? So lorem 100, something like this. So you can see there are 100 characters here, right? Then we looked at list items, right? We looked at ordered list, unordered list, right? Ordered list was what? Where it was numbered, right? Unordered list was where it is not numbered. One thing I actually forgot to tell you was where list items actually get used, right? So normally where you will use list items is in the navigation bar. Whenever you go to, even if you go to Sharda's website, you can see these items, right? Like international within the navigation bar. Here you will often use list items, right? So it is important to know which tag gets used where, right? These often also get used in the footer, right? Like this may also be defined within list, right? Next, we looked at images, right? Where I said that images can be like a tricky part, right? Because I said that it takes in a mandatory attribute, right? This was the first time I showed you the use of attributes. Attributes are what? Extra information that gets added to the tag, right? So this was a source attribute in which we basically define the location of our image, right? And I said there are two ways to basically define the location of your image, right? One was directly typing in the URL, right? So if you go to any website, like let me show you. When I went to Unsplash, you basically go here, you click on the image that you want, and then you left click and you copy the image address, right? That was the one way. The other way was I showed you the directory method, right? Remember I said that, oh, you could say dot dot, and then you can go back and you can get the image, right? That was the other method, right? One was the directory method, the other one was the image address method. Normally, as a beginner, I would recommend you getting the address, right? The URL, right? Because in that way you 100% have no, like you get the image, right? Sometimes the directory ways are a bit confusing, right? So as a beginner, I recommend you use the URL method, right? Next, we looked at anchor tags, right? Anchor tags are what? The hyperlinks, this, right? So when I clicked on this, you can see that it opens up a new website, right? One question that came at the end was, what was the difference between target and source, right? So we have to remember that target is an attribute of the anchor tag, right? So target can't be used here. Watch, target can't be used here, right? There's no autocomplete. Even Visual Studio Code tells you that target as an attribute can't be used here, right? Similarly, the source attribute can't be used here, right? Some attributes are basically unique to their particular tags, right? The href basically acts like a source, right? It's similar to this as source in the image tag, meaning that in this you basically define the location of where you want to visit, right? Like if you want to visit this particular website, if you want to visit this particular web page, in this it also takes two types, right? The URL and the directory method, right? And this, you may be wondering what the target is. The target is basically defined. I'll show you what it is, right? I'm going to delete it and see what's the effect, right? So if I go here and I click this, right? So see what happens. I click it and I go to the particular website on the same web page, right? Now watch what happens when I add target, right? And I'm going to add the value blank. Now watch what happens. Carefully watch what happens when I click on this, right? I click on this and you can see it opens in a new tab, right? Before, what was happening when I didn't have this, it was opening in the same tab, right? So it is a good practice to have this particular attribute. It is not a mandatory attribute. Ye hona nahi chahiye, right? Like this is a mandatory attribute, but this is a good user experience, right? It's user friendly, right? So when you practice enough, you will start to understand why this is important, right? Next, what we discussed forms, right? I said that forms, they are usually used with backend, right? When you are, learning Node.js, you will often encounter forms, right? Because what you do in forms, you basically save whatever the user has typed, right? So if I go back, I'm gonna go back here, right? So normally what happens is you will type your name, you will submit, and once you submit, that user data gets saved in the database, right? And that's done through a backend through the help of server-side language, right? So we're not so concerned about that. We just looked at some tags, right? We looked at the different types of inputs, like they can be of type text, they can be of type radio, checkbox. There are more, like if you do input colon, you can see so many options comes up, right? Date, time, all those, right? So I would recommend you to explore, right? Just simply just start typing your HTML and start to see its effect within the browser, right? And this was kind of all about forms, right? The last thing that we discussed yesterday was classes and IDs, right? And there was some confusion regarding that. So let me just discuss what classes and IDs are and what's the difference between them, right? So classes, I want you to just remember them as names, right? Classes are like the name that you give to this element, right? And another question that came up, can I apply classes and IDs to all the elements? Classes and IDs can be applied to any element within HTML. I can apply class here as well as ID here. I can also apply class here, right? I can also apply class here. I can apply class here as well, right? So classes and IDs, they are basically two attributes which you can use with every particular tag element, right? So classes are basically the name, right? The name of any HTML element, meaning that you agree, right? In Sharda University, two or more people will have the same name, right? There will be many Rahuls within Sharda University, right? So that means in HTML, it is the same concept. Any number of elements can have the same name, right? Same class name. So this can also be called first H1, right? There's no problem with that. The next thing we talk about is IDs, right? Now, IDs are like unique identifiers. They're like your roll number, your system ID. They're unique, right? So that means if one element has a ID name of H1, no other element within your HTML can have the same ID, right? And we'll see why that's damaging, right? Right now, you won't see the effects of why that's damaging, but once we start implementing CSS and JavaScript, you will see why that's damaging, right? Another question that came yesterday was, why do we need IDs, right? Why do we need IDs in class? The reason you will understand in CSS lessons, right? The reason you want classes and IDs is because you want to select these elements, right? You basically want to select these elements and you want to apply some style, right? So for example, like if I go here, you maybe want to changing the color of this, right? You want to change the color of this, right? Something like that, right? So in that case, you will need classes and IDs, right? In order to select those elements and apply some style, right? So that was basically a rough discussion of, basically a rough revision of yesterday, right? So I hope nobody has any confusion regarding that. So if you have any confusion, you can ask, right? So moving on, so we'll discuss a little bit more advanced concepts today, right? So I'm gonna go in this directory and I'm gonna create a new file, right? Source code, second session, new file, right? And I'm also going to name it index.html, right? Now I showed you a neat trick yesterday on how to basically avoid writing the same amount of code, right? I said if you click shift 1, right, you can see that this particular option comes up, right? You can click this and you can see it automatically fills it, right? So again, I'll show you. If you click shift 1, it auto completes it, right? So we'll just give our title second session. Right, and within our body comes our main HTML code, right? So I'm just gonna define some HTML elements like h1 second session. I'm also gonna define an anchor tag like go here. I'm also gonna define an image, right? I just want to show you one particular concept, right? Within this, let me just copy this image address. Let me just show you a better view, right? And I also talked about live server, right? Whenever yesterday, if you remember, we had problems with refreshing, right? I keep having to refresh every time I made some changes, right? So I said that if you go to if you see the left bar, right? If you go down to extensions, you can basically type in live server, right? So the first option that basically pops up, you can basically go there and install it, right? And I said that once you install this, you can go back to your HTML file, left click, and you can see open with live server. So whenever you're doing any development, you want to do open with live server, right? So this basically avoids this avoids the process of refreshing, right? So you don't have to constantly refresh to see the effects of whatever you have written within your HTML, right? Because let me just add one more attribute with pixels. Yeah. So what I want to basically show you is, you can see, if you can see, there's an anchor tag here, right? As well as there's an image tag here, right? So you can see there's an anchor tag and there's an image, right? So you can see that these two elements, the image and the anchor tag, they're on the same line, right? You can see like this particular element, which is a heading, right? It is on a different line as compared to your anchor tag and your image, right? But you can see that this particular element, which is the anchor tag, so it's this element, right? Anchor tag, right? The hyperlink, it is in the same line as the image, right? So that's kind of, you can see that it doesn't look good, right? And you may also be wondering why that is, right? Because shouldn't the image be below the anchor tag? Because within my HTML, I have defined the image below my anchor tag, right? And from within this code, right, before on our web page, you saw that everything was below each other, right? But here it's the images within the same line, right? So let me introduce one other tag called break tag, right? This is basically a self-closing tag as well, right? BR. Now watch what happens. You can see that the image is now on a different line as compared to the anchor tag, right? So let me just comment it out and you can see they're on the same line, right? When I uncomment it, you can see they're on a different line, right? Now you may be wondering why that doesn't happen with the heading, right? Like why isn't the heading within the same line as this? And why isn't the image within the same line as this? I will talk to you about something called block and inline elements. I'll explain what that is. But right now there's a tag called break tag. And in my experience, you would rarely use this because once you start getting familiar with CSS, and once you start getting familiar with block and inline elements, you would rarely use this particular break tag. But I just wanted to make sure you guys are aware of this particular tag, right? So the break tag. I'm also going to add a paragraph, right? Lorem 20, right? So similar to break tag, we also have a horizontal rule tag, right? This is similar to your break tag. Basically, you can do something like this, right? Let me show you why I do this. It is basically kind of like make it more attractive, just basically using HTML. Now watch what happens. You can see there's a line, right, to kind of separate your paragraph from all the other elements, right? So again, like, a lot of people, it's again rarely used, right? Rarely used, but it is a good thing to know because sometimes, whenever you're defining navigation bars and footers, you may use horizontal rules, right? But again, it's not like the most important one, right? So that's kind of about break and horizontal rule tag, right? Next, I want to discuss about inline.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, Ayush, there is a question in the chat box like why we use alt tag in images RC. Can you
Okay.
please
Yeah.
just repeat that?
Yeah. So let me show you why this particular tag, right? You're talking about this, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm gonna do, right, is you can see that if I go back, the image is loaded, right? If I refresh, the image is nice and loaded. So what I'm gonna do is basically I'm gonna add some random things, right? I'm gonna add some random things. Now this is not a valid URL, right? So this is not a valid URL. So that means if I go back to the web page, the image would not be there, right? Because basically this is some random URL. This is not the original URL. So watch what happens. Wait, well, let me just, yeah. So you can see that the image disappeared, right? You can see that there's nothing there, right? So let me just delete alt as well. So the reason you use alt tag is because you see this outside border that is coming here, right? You can see that, right? And this is basically indicating that your image has not been loaded, right? Now watch what happens when I put back the alt, right? And let me just write something within this. So you can see that something comes up, right? Whatever I've written here comes here, right? So normally the reason you use alt tags is because sometimes when you visit websites, your image may not load, right? Like let's say there is some problem or it's taking time to load and your image may never load, right? So it's good practice to use alt tag to show that, okay, the image has not loaded yet. You may use some alternate message like there's no image here, because when you don't use this alt tag, you can see it kind of what it does is, first of all, it's occupying so much more space, and it's basically showing to the user, it's basically showing, like, you can see how, it doesn't look so attractive, right? So the alt tag, it's basically used to indicate to the user that my image has not been loaded, and this is the that message that gets shown when no image is loaded, right? So this is the message that gets shown when no image is loaded, right? So whenever no image gets loaded, within whatever is written within the alt, that is the one that gets loaded, right? So I hope I have answered this question. It is not a mandatory attribute, right? It is basically an optional attribute. If you want to add it, you can, but if you don't, it's up to you. But again, it is good practice to do so, right? So
Thanks for
yeah.
answering, Ayush. Yeah. Any more questions, folks? You can raise your hand, unmute yourself, or just write your queries in the chat box itself. Yeah, Aryan. Go ahead, please. All
Do
right.
we need internet to access the image?
So when I copied the image address, right, then you need internet access. But when you download it, remember when I showed you that you can download and you can use the directory method? If you have downloaded the image, then you don't need any internet. But because I'm copying the image address, then I need internet, right? So that is when you need internet. You need internet when you have used the URL method. But if you have download the image and saved it within your directory, then you don't need internet. So does anybody have any else questions? Yeah, so anchor tag. So anchor tag is basically like a hyperlink, right? So if you go to like Sharda University, you see these links, right? These links, these are hyperlinks, these are anchor tags. Why? Because when you click on, like, you see when I click on this, I get redirected to some other web page, right? So anchor tags, in which it takes in one mandatory attribute, which is known as href, right? What href does is it basically defines the location, right, to where you want to go. So I'll show you, right? Like, let's say I want to go to Sharda University's original web page, right? So I can copy the URL, and within href, I can basically paste in the URL, right? So what this does is, if I click on this, I will be redirected to Sharda's original website, right? It is, yeah, you can see that it's redirected to the Sharda's original website, right? So href, that's the whole point of href, is it's basically saying that, oh, give me the location of where you want to go, right? That's all that's saying, right? So that is href, and within the opening and closing brackets, you basically define the content, right? So I can basically say, right, go to Sharda University's website, right? So you can see, right, when I click on this hyperlink, you can open link in new tab, you get redirected to Sharda's website, right? So that is anchor tags, right? Anchor tags are used in usually navigation bars, and if you see Sharda's footer, you can see that here are also anchor tags gets used, right? So whole point of anchor tags are what? Redirecting, right? Redirecting to some either website or web page, right? So that's all about anchor tags. So does anybody else have any questions? So yeah, let's move on. Where was I? Yeah. So I was talking about inline and block elements, right? So this is kind of like the most important thing to understand, right? Inline and block elements. So let me just delete this and copy it back, right? Because I want the image to load, right? So you can see the image is loaded, right? Now I'm gonna remove this break tag here, right? Just watch. So remember when I said that when there's no break tag, the image is within the same line as your anchor tag, right? And you may be wondering why that is, right? And I said that it is because of inline and block elements. Now, what are inline and block elements, right? In HTML, all the elements will be of two types. They will either be block elements, inline elements. What did I say? All elements in the HTML will either be inline elements or block elements, right? They're either inline or block elements. Meaning, so let's discuss what block elements are, right? Block elements are basically elements which take more space than they are required, right? These are elements that basically I want you to think them as like greedy elements, right? These are the elements which take more space than they are required. So I'll show you, right? You see this particular heading, right? So this was a what we defined an H1 here, right? You see H1. Now watch what I do, right? I'm gonna left click, right? So whenever you're on your web page, you can basically left click and click inspect, right? Something called the developer tools opens up, right? So I'm gonna close it, I'm gonna show it again, right? Left click, inspect. You can click it anywhere on your web page, right? It doesn't matter. I can click here, inspect, right? So what the developer tools are is this is kind of like this is something that you have to keep close to when you're developing, right? When you are going to be developing using JavaScript, right? When you're going to be writing JavaScript, CSS, this is the first thing that you will use, right? Because here you can see actually our HTML code, right? Whatever is written here is actually written here, right? So you can access the HTML through here actually, and you can make changes, but whatever changes you make in here are not going to be reflected, right? Like for example, if I change anything here, you can see I can actually change the content here, like first session. So you can see it got changed, right? But if you refresh, it goes back to whatever's written within your HTML code, right? So this is a good way to play around with your code, right? So what I wanted to show you was we were talking about inline and block elements, right? This is called the developer tools. This is something that most developers use when building websites, right? So you see that there's a heading here, right? This is our H1, right? Now watch what happens when I select it. Watch what happens. Can you see the blue highlighted part, right? You can see the blue highlighted part. So not this. Look at the blue. You see the blue rectangular part, right? Which is between the two yellow parts, right? So there's a blue highlighted part, right? So it's kind of like this part, right? And you don't focus on the yellow part, right? Ignore the yellow part for now. Just focus on the blue part, right? So you can see that our heading is taking up all this space, right? It's taking up the entire web page in the horizontal manner, right? Where that, but if you see that it should only take up this amount of space, right? Our heading is only of this particular length, but the element itself is taking the entire web page. Meaning that if you have like this particular content, this particular piece of content, right? Second session, it is only taking this amount of space, right? This amount of space. But however, the heading tag itself is taking the entire row, right? And when any element takes up an entire row, that is called a block element. I'll give you an example. If you go on, let's say you're traveling in a metro, right? Let's say you're traveling in a metro and you know there's rows of seats, right? So there's a row of seats this way, there's a rows of seats this way, right? Let's say you sit in the corner seat, right? You go and sit in the last seat. Now, what you say to all the other passengers, you say that no one should sit beside me, right? No one should sit in the same row as me. So you are basically, this is a row, right? This is a row. You are sitting at the corner. No other person, you don't want any other person to sit beside you, right? You basically want all the other person to sit somewhere else, but they should not sit beside you. So that is what block elements are. They are kind of greedy elements. They are taking way more space than they need, right? Because if you think about it, the heading should only be of this particular length, But if you go and if you hover over this particular H1, you can see that it's taking this entire space. So that is what block elements are, right? Now you may be wondering, okay, so yeah, so you may be a question that often comes up, right? Is like, which elements are block elements and which elements are inline elements, right? So like, so even there are a lot of elements which are block elements, which a lot of elements are inline elements, right? So all you can do is simply type block elements in HTML, right? So you can basically get which elements are block. I'll show you. You can see that there are so many elements which are block elements, right? Like even the headings, the our ordered list, our paragraph, these are block elements, right? So again, let me repeat, block elements are elements which are greedy. They are taking way more space than they required, right? Even this particular paragraph, this is a block element, right? You can see that if I highlight over my paragraph, you can see that this extra blue here, it's taking this extra space, even though this amount of space is only required for that particular paragraph. So those are block elements, right? Now, on the contrary, inline elements, right? What are inline elements? Inline elements are those elements which are basically not greedy, right? Inline elements are saying, I'm happy with my space, right? I don't need extra space like those block elements, right? So let me highlight an inline element. An inline element is like your image element. You see the blue highlighted part, right? You can see the blue highlighted over the image. You notice how it's not basically taking this amount of space, right? It's not taking the entire row. So you can see that the blue highlighted part is only over the image itself. It's not taking extra information, right? Even if I highlight the anchor tag, look, the anchor tag is only taking whatever's inside, right? Whatever's this, go to Sharda University. Like if I reduce this, like let's say I say go, right? Watch, you can see that it's only taking that much space, right? You can see the blue highlighted part, it has reduced, right? So whatever is within the content, whatever is within the opening and closing braces, only that much space will be taken by the inline elements, right? Like let's see what in some inline elements are. You can see anchor tag, right? That's an inline element. You can see where the image tag, that's an inline element, right? So an inline element are those elements which do not require extra space, right? So those are the basically the two types of elements that you have in the HTML, right? Inline elements, block elements, right? So I hope that is clear. So does anybody have any doubt regarding inline and block elements? You can ask. You can raise your hand and you can maybe ask in the chat box. It's all up to you. So yeah, so next what we will discuss actually based on inline and block elements, we're actually going to discuss one of the most important tags that you will use all the time, right? So yeah, Salman, do you have any question?
या मेरा एक क्वेश्चन, जैसे हमने हेडिंग 1 स्टार्ट की तो वो बिल्कुल कॉर्नर से स्टार्ट
Yeah.
होती है, उसे शिफ्ट कैसे करेंगे इधर उधर आगे
Yeah,
पीछे
so
शायद?
about positioning will all be covered in CSS, right? When you have to move any elements, अगर कोई element move करना चाहते हो, जैसे इसको last में लेके जाना चाहते हो या फिर इस element को बीच में लेके जाते हो, this will all be in CSS, because in CSS we'll cover a very important topic called positioning, and in that I will explain all about how you can move this element here or here, right? So right now just don't focus on positioning. I'll explain it in the upcoming CSS sessions, right? So I hope that is clear, right? So yeah, so based on, I was talking about inline and block elements, right? So based on this, I'm actually going to discuss something very important regarding block elements, right? A very important tag that goes by the name of division tag, right? You will use this almost like always, right? Whenever you're building any website, it is guaranteed you will use this tag, right? So it is div, right? Now division tags are basically, they're also block elements, right? They're also block elements. So what the whole purpose of a div tag is like I want you to think of a div tag as a box, right? A box in which you can put in other elements, right? You know, whenever you have any cardboard box, you can put in your, you can put either the similar elements, you can put similar items, or you can put different items, right? So within the division tag, what the whole purpose of your division tag is, you can basically encapsulate your data. Meaning, encapsulate meanings, if you have noticed right now, our, you know, our code is kind of in a free flow, right? Like we have our heading here, we have our image here, and then we have a paragraph here. So it's, there's no, you know, structure to our website, right? It's kind of all going in a free flow. So in order to, you know, enforce some structure, you basically make use of division tag, right? Also, the reason you use division tags is because you may want to kind of group similar items together. So let me show you an example, right? If I go to Sharda's website, right, you see the title Sharda University, but then you also see some text within it, right? Both this text and this title, Sharda University, both of this may be encapsulated within the same division, right? Because they are both kind of trying to show the same type of information, right? So this, whenever you have like you know, similar information, or you have elements which are basically common to one topic, you may want to encapsulate that within the same division, right? So that is why we use divisions. The whole purpose is to kind of show that, oh, within this division, I have basically the content of the title page, right? The landing page, right? Like if I even go to Technova's page, I used a division for this, right? Because this is all common. This is kind of common to one topic, the topic being introduction, right? So this is within the division of introduction, right? So this is how you kind of have to think when you're developing websites, right? So that is basically about divisions, right? I'll show you, like within this, you basically have, like, you know, you may have a heading, like let's say take another heading like division heading, right? Within this, you also have a paragraph, right? Like lorem 20, right? You may have a anchor tag like go here, right? So if I go here, you can see that this whole thing is a division, right? So if I basically left click and I said inspect, right? If I highlight over my division, watch what gets highlighted. You see that rectangular box, because I said, remember that division, what it is, it's basically like a box, right? It's kind of like a box which encapsulate data, right? So within this division, it encapsulates a heading, paragraph, anchor tag, right? So a division is like a box in which it basically encapsulates the similar amount of similar information. That's all I want you to remember about division, right? And you can see that division is a block element, right? Because you can see that it's requiring extra space than it needs to, right? So that is about divisions. A lot of people also ask like, oh, can I convert block elements to inline elements, right? Or can I convert inline elements to block elements? We will cover that in CSS, right? That is a topic that gets, you know, that is something that you should learn, right? How to convert block element to inline elements, right? Because before, what we were doing, like if we wanted to move this image onto the next line, we were using a break tag. But I also mentioned that break tag is rarely used, because in CSS, we cover the concept of converting inline elements to block elements, right? So that's important. So just like we have divisions, division elements, which are block elements, right? So remember, division, just think of them as block, like a box, right? Similarly to division, we also have span elements, right? Span elements. And these are basically, so span elements. And these are like the opposite to division elements. These are your inline elements, right? So you can basically type in any text here, right? Any text, right? And these are your inline elements, meaning that they won't require that extra bit of space, right? Like if I define an anchor tag here, right? See what happens. You can see that all of it is in the same line, right? The span, which is this, and the anchor tag, which is this, right? It is in the same line. Why? Because span is an inline element and the anchor tag is also an inline element, right? So when you have two inline elements next to, like one after the other, they will be in the same line, right? Whereas if you have a block element, it will be in a different line. So that's kind of important to understand, right? Span elements. So that's kind of all about the span elements and inline elements, right? So next thing I want to kind of show you how websites like I want to basically show you the structure of any website, right? So I think I downloaded an image. Yeah, I hope this image is visible. Let me just zoom in, right? So I hope this image is visible, right? So this is basically a image of a particular layout of every website, right? So whenever you want to design any website, you have to follow this structure, right? You can see header, navigation bar, main content, footer. I'll explain each of them, right? So whenever this whole concept is basically whenever you're designing any website for client, you should follow this type of structure, right? Because if you look at right now, our website is still missing some structure, right? There's no like you don't know which should be placed on top, you don't know what should be placed in the main content, what should be placed in footer. It is kind of confusing, right? So that is why, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, right? Layout.html, right? Again, shift 1 to autocomplete, right? And layout, right? So within this, I basically want to kind of the last 5 minutes I'll wrap up with showing you how your website should be structured, right? Now, if you go to any website, like if I go to Sharda's website, you can see that that on the top there's always a header, right? There's a navigation bar. Within those navigation bar, there are what links, links to other web pages or other websites, whatever, right? So this is known with your header. Within your header comes your navigation bar, which consists of several links, right? Now, after the header and navigation bar comes your what? Let's see, main content, right? So all of this, starting from the navigation bar or starting from the header, all of this is the main content, right? Up till, let's see where the footer is, up till this footer, right? This blue border you can see, this is what our footer, right? And within this footer comes our, some links or extra, our social media handles and so forth, right? So this is kind of like a structure that you follow to almost every website that you kind of build, right? Even if you go to Technova's website, it's similar to this, right? You have a footer, then you have all this main content, and then you have the footer, right? So header, main content, footer. That's the structure that you follow, right? So how do we instill that within our website, right? So you start with, I said, you start with header, right? You have the header tag. It's important now to not get confused the header tag with the head tag, right? The head tag is outside the body, metadata, right? Remember, head tag consists of metadata. Header tag is basically your, remember, navigation bar. So header, within this, you will often contain a tag called nav tag, right? Navigation tag, right? And within this, you will consist of like, your anchor tags, right? It is good practice to have list items. Remember, we discussed about unordered, ordered list, right? So it is good practice to have your unordered list, and within this you have your list items, right? Like home or about, right? Something like this, right? So let me just rewind that and let me explain it again, right? Within your header comes your navigation, right? Within your navigation comes like, like several like links, right? We saw on Technova's like home, achievements, members, like these, right? And I said that it's good practice to use unordered list, right? Like list items, right? We discussed list items yesterday, right? Within UL, I said that there comes another tag called list items. If you saw that yesterday, we discussed unordered list, right? And this is how you declare an unordered list, right? You have unordered list and then you have your list items, right? So similarly, within here, UL, you may have like home, and then you may have about something like this, right? So if I open this with my live server, you can see within our navigation bar, you have something like home about, right? And you may be wondering why it is not in a horizontal manner. Again, all of this will be covered in CSS, right? We will see how to make the navigation bar in a horizontal manner. We will see even to how to make it like this, right? So don't worry about positioning, styling, all of that will be in CSS. But right now, I just want you to understand that this is kind of the layout, right? Within the header, you have your navigation. Within your navigation, you have the several links, right? Like that is declared within your list, right? So this is your header, right? So that's kind of about header. So the next one that comes is your main content, right? Now, one tag that gets often used for declaring main content is the main tag, right? The main tag. You can see that when I highlight over main tag, Visual Studio Code actually tells you what that tag is, right? You can see the main element represents the main content of the body, right? Now, this tag is not mandatory to use. Again, this tag is basically a tag that gets, often when you're developing websites, you may be working with more than one, you may be working with another person. So it is important for the other person to understand your code, right? And then in this case, you may want to, in a nice way, you want to basically organize your code, right? Because I will tell you that once you start writing HTML, once you start designing a website, there will be a lot of HTML code, right? बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाता है, and then it becomes a problem of you don't know where most of your elements are. It becomes really confusing. In this case, you want to, nicely format it, like within the header, it consists navigation, and within your main content comes your, your main content, like whatever within your website you want to, integrate, right? So this is my main content, right? Comment it out using control slash, right? Control slash comment out, right? And within this comes your main content, right? Like we can use divisions, right? Like h1 hello, right? Then we can have a paragraph, right? Like a lorem 20, right? Right. So I'm just going to basically copy this whole division several times to basically show you how hectic your HTML code can get, right? Right. So I've just basically copied this same division tag, same division all over, right? So you can see it looks something like this now, your web page, right? Now you can see it's kind of getting a little hectic, right? And that is why we basically declare like, oh, this should be within main content, right? Another neat technique that I'll show you is you can see that if you go this arrow, right? You can see this arrow, right? If let's say you are done with all of this work, right? Let's say you're done with all of this work. What you can do is basically you can see this arrow, you can click on it and your content, your code will be hidden, right? So in this way, you can work in a, in a much nicer fashion, right? So you can basically click on it again and your content will be there again, right? And at the last, right, we have our header, which we declared right here. Next, we have our navigation bar, which we declared within a header because navigation are always within the header, right? Then comes your main content, which I declared within the main tag, right? If yeah, within the main tag till here, right? And finally comes your footer, right? Finally comes your footer. So within this, again, it consists of like list items, right? Like, I don't know, like home, again, you may want to do home, about, again, right? Or you may want to like, show your copyright, like your name, Aayush Juyal 2020. You want to type and percent copy, right? You may want to do that, right? You can see like there's a copyright symbol, right? So this is, all of this is your footer, right? So what the whole purpose of this is basically, I want to show you like there's a nice structure to our website, right? There's a header, there's the main content, and now there's a footer, right? So this kind of, it's a nice way to section your website, right? Like you want to separate your main content, your header, your footer. So this is a good practice, right? One last piece of information that I basically want to tell you guys is you can see that this divisions, you can see how many divisions I have, right? There's about like what, 5, 6 divisions, right? You will have at least like, way more divisions than that. Like when I was building the Technova website, I had like 11, 12 divisions on the same web page, right? And you can see that this is kind of getting hectic as well, right? You can see that a lot of this is kind of difficult to read, right? So we have another concept called sections, right? Sections, right? I'll show you what the point of sections is, right? If you go to the Technova's webpage, the landing page, right? I basically, this is one particular section, right? Whenever you want to encapsulate several divisions within one particular section, you will basically make use of a section tag, right? Like for example, all of this, you can see that all of this, right? This heading, paragraph, this button, this image, all of this was encapsulated within a particular section, right? This section was called the landing page. If I go down here, this was another section about vision and mission, right? Because I wanted to encapsulate this, this particular division, this entire square division, this entire square division, and so forth. So that is when you make use of something called sections, right? Sections. And within this section, you can basically copy your divisions, right? So if I copy my divisions, you can copy it within your sections, right? And you can give it like a class name of landing page, right? So what this does, it basically structures your website more, and it basically divides your web page into different sections. So now you will know which page, which one is belonging to which one, right? So that is all about sections.
Ayush, what is the difference between section and division?
Yeah, so basically whenever you're using divisions, right, you will never have a section within a division, right? Divisions are like if section is like a big box, a division will be considered a smaller box, right? Like a section will be like within a section, you will have several divisions, right? But you can never have a section within a division, right? I'm not saying that you can't have, but it is very bad practice to do that, right? Because normally, whenever we are designing websites, we divide our web page into different sections, right? So this may be one section, another section may be like, I don't know, like, you may have like review section, that may be another section. So that these are like, whenever you divide your website, you want to divide it into sections. Within sections consist of your divisions, right? So that is the difference between sections and your divisions.
Ayush, I want to ask, like, you have given the name to a section, so can we give a name to the division also?
Yeah, so I've given the class, right? I said classes and IDs can be given to all, right? So I can give class, right? I can say, right, oh, this is a heading, right? I can give the name class to this one as well, right? So remember I said at the start, classes and IDs, they can be
Can be
given to all the elements, right? So
okay.
yeah,
So what I understood personally, that section is a class, super class, and
yeah,
this
yeah,
division is a subclass.
yeah. You can think of it as like that. Yeah,
And sections are optional. Am I correct?
it is good practice to do it, yes, but they are optional. Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
yeah.
All right,
So
folks, I'm enabling chat box for you all. If you have any questions, just drop your question. No bullshits. Chat box section is enabled now. If you want to ask any question, raise your hands or use the chat box. Okay, I think everyone is clear. Section and division again.
yeah.
Okay, just
So sections are basically like, I want you to think of as like, these are basically used for like, whenever you're designing a new web page, right? Within sections will consist of your divisions, right? Divisions are basically like smaller boxes, right? And sections are like your like larger boxes, right? And within sections, you will have several divisions, but within divisions, you will never have sections, right? Like if I go to Technova's webpage, you can see like this entire thing was one section, right? And within this section was consisting of like this division, right? And this particular image, right? Like if I go down here, this entire thing was a section, and within this there was a division, within this there was another division. So section basically is used to kind of like separate the different content within your web page, right? And division is kind of like used to do it within that particular section, right? Like you are separating this part with this part with this part and so forth, right? So that's important. Yeah, you can create subdivision, right? So you can create a division within this division as well. You can do that. That's all totally up to you, right? That's depending on what you want to create, right? You can create subdivisions, you can create divisions within divisions, right? You can create a division within a block element, right? So it's up to you how you basically want to design it, right?
okay. Any more question, guys?
So I just wanted to answer why block elements are present, why not every tag is inline, right? Well, the reason why not every tag is the problem with it being inline is then your website will kind of look very, it won't look good, right? You can see that this image is within the same, you can see on the same line as this, right? But like if that's the case, then it kind of does not look your website attractive because it looks kind of congested, right? So if all your elements are inline, then all of them will be on the same line, right? Then you kind of won't be using the web page space in a vertical manner at all, right? So that's important to understand.
Aayush, I think all is clear. You can continue with the session. Folks,
Yeah,
just I want 1 minute. Like, should we continue or should we stop?
actually I'm kind of done for today. Like I've covered everything I needed to do.
Please repeat one more time this answer, please. Okay. Then why we need section? We can create subdivision and give the name. See, Raza, it's generally the practice, industrial practice that you should create a section,
Yeah.
although you can do it without even creating the sections. So, all right. So I think we are done for the day. If you have any specific question, please unmute yourself. And just for a good photograph of today's session, I request each one of you to switch on the camera. Just give me a second, guys. I have to fix it. Yeah, please. Let me change the layout. All right, folks. Right now I'm just switch on the camera. Yeah. So, okay, I'm changing the layout so that I can fix it. Give me a couple of seconds. Automatically. I'm taking a layout of 16.